Hello and welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is brought to you today in partnership with RingCentral, Auscontact's national silver sponsor, and it's entitled 8 Key Insights from the Post-COVID-19 Contact Centre, a New Zealand success story. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and during that time, with the help of today's special guest, Grant Walker, CEO of To Be Connected, we hope to spark your interest, engage you in the conversation, as well as provide you with some ideas to take back to your respective businesses. To round off the session, we'll be having a Q&A at the end of the webinar. I'm Fiona Keogh, CEO of Auscontact and your moderator for today. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, let's use the time to quickly run through some housekeeping with you. Remember to interact with us to maximise the benefit, and as you know, there's no need to take too many notes because we'll be providing you with the recording of the webinar. To interact with us, please use the Q&A button on the control panel. You can ask questions or make comments for Grant or myself from time to time. Don't forget that we will be having a full Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please type your questions throughout the webinar so you don't forget to ask them. If you're listening through headphones or speakers and experience any issues with your internet connection, please note that on the control panel, you can click the raise hand button and the Auscontact team will rush to your aid, or you can revert to your confirmation email with the link to the webinar, and all the relevant phone numbers and access codes will be available there for you. I know that many of you are familiar with asking questions, but let's try out the questions button, the Q&A button on the control panel now, just in case. And the question for today is, and it's a very Australian flavoured question. So, what time has the curfew in Melbourne been extended to? Now, Grant, you're probably not worried about a curfew time in New Zealand, you lucky ducks, you. Or you lucky Kiwis, you. Really, you're not ducks, are you?
No, we haven't had a curfew in 6 months. So
yeah. So we're getting some good answers here. There are people that are extremely aware that they have to be off the streets by 9 p.m. Fantastic. Well, we know that everybody knows how to use the Q&A button. So let's hope that everything is going to move ahead beautifully for our friends in Melbourne. So with that, you've heard Grant's voice, so you might notice there's a little bit of an accent there. So let's welcome a brand new voice, which is Grant Walker, CEO of To Be Connected. So Grant, before we launch madly into the webinar, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm obviously Kiwi. I actually lived in Melbourne for about 6 or 7 years. I got started in contact centres, as most people do, with a on-the-phone gig for 4 to 6 weeks. Just needed some money to fill in the gap. And it's been a crazy ride since then. I've done all sorts of things, but a couple of years ago, my wife Gemma and I decided that we were mad enough to move back to New Zealand and start our own outsourced contact centre. And the rest is history, as they say, but that's kind of what my journey's been like. We're back in Christchurch with our now 2 children. Seems to be something in the water in Christchurch, so we've now got a second child, and loving life. And I think having made the decision a couple of years ago, had we known that all of this was coming this year, I think it was a smart decision at the time, and I'm certainly glad I'm not in Melbourne at the moment.
Fantastic, Grant. Well, over to you.
Thanks. So we were originally going to have a story about how New Zealand was COVID-free, but that's not entirely factually correct anymore. So we had to pivot a little bit, and you'll hear more about that soon. But hopefully we're going to cover off, how New Zealand is really punching above its weight in the contact centre industry, and I think this year will show more and more why New Zealand is a good choice, and how New Zealand fits into that sort of outsource offshore dynamic. Hopefully we can show you how we've been making cost savings and driving efficiencies through our business, and how we focus on our staff and people, and some real examples from the post-COVID-19 environment, which is what we're living in here in New Zealand, and certainly in the South Island. We've pretty much disregarded any government advice, and it's just business as usual. In fact, business is booming in the South Island. So I guess we could say the South Island's COVID-19 free for now anyway. So a little bit about To Be Connected, because most of you probably haven't heard of us before. We are the fastest growing outsourced contact centre in New Zealand, which is something I'm incredibly proud of. And Gemma and I founded the business, as I mentioned before, in 2018. We moved back from Melbourne to little old sleepy Christchurch. We provide outsourced contact centre services. So most people, most of the audience here will be familiar with outsourcing and what that means, but anything involving the phone essentially is normally what we get involved in. We're particularly strong in lead generation. We do a lot of outbound sales and a huge amount of inbound customer service for a range of organisations. So we help companies, so right from startup, so small business, answering their phones, answer service, right through to large banks and things like that. So we've got a good understanding of what's going on in the market across Australia and New Zealand, because we're seeing what all of our customers are doing, as well as what we've been doing as a business. So we fit strategically, I guess, between Australia, which is historically one of the highest cost destinations in the world to have your contact centre, and all of those, I guess, low cost destinations like your Philippines and India and South Africa. But we give you get some cost advantages by coming to New Zealand versus being in Australia. But for all intents and purposes, we're one and the same. We're just the poor little brother of Australia, as we get referred to many times, and that's served us really well. For Gemma and I, the most important thing when we were setting up the business was the people, and making sure that we had the best people, which we definitely do in New Zealand, and then investing in them and making it a really good environment for them to work in. We've both come from being on the phones as agents, so we've had our horror stories, as every agent has, and we wanted to do something a little bit different, and that's what we try and do. Hopefully that comes through in sort of what we're about. And our philosophy is really the best call every single time. Just like everybody else in the contact center world, I get fed up with dealing with mediocre customer service all the time and having bad experiences. So while we can't change the world, hopefully we can change at least a few of those interactions that people are having, and that's what we're kind of about here, and how we try and differentiate ourselves from everybody else in the market and provide value back to our clients. So pivot is a word that we've certainly heard a lot of here in New Zealand, and I'm sure Australia is exactly the same. Pivot. And we've been really fortunate in New Zealand that our COVID story was a success story right from day one, and that our government made the big call to go hard and go early and to lock down the whole country for 4 weeks initially, which ended up being about 5.5. And at the time, that was sort of unheard of. Now we kind of see that as, we see that happening all over the place, like in Melbourne. But at the time, it was literally everybody had to stay at home for 4 weeks in their bubble, and you could go out for exercise, you could go to the supermarket for groceries, and go and seek medical attention should you require it. But apart from that, there was no interaction with anybody. Every business was pretty much shut. You couldn't even get a takeaway coffee. So, all takeaways were shut. Uber Eats was shut down, so that the whole country literally came to a standstill. And everybody obviously, went and worked from home where they could. And the rest of the people just had to sit at home and twiddle their thumbs for what ended up being nearly 6 weeks. So at the time, that was it would have been an incredibly hard decision for the people that made that to make that decision, and it was incredibly hard on a lot of people. But I think we've seen, that through the last few months where we have had very little restrictions placed on us. In fact, the only real restriction up until a couple of weeks ago was that we couldn't travel internationally. And apart from that, it was pretty much life was back to normal. Even with the latest outbreak in Auckland, I think we've seen that we've responded really, really quickly and well, and shut that down pretty quickly and kept it isolated. And I think that is what we should expect for the future, is this rolling kind of lockdown in and out of different alert levels, or whatever each jurisdiction wants to call it. But there's going to be a lot of disruption for the next couple of years, and I don't think that's going to ease up. Even if they can get a vaccine, prepared by the middle of next year, I still think it's going to be a long time before we see the opening of borders and all those kind of things, and we get back to some form of business as usual. I guess the thing that I've had front of mind for the last few months is that we need to be prepared for more disruption. So even though we think we might be nailing it, and we've pivoted and we've changed and our business is ticking along really, really nicely, you've got to be prepared for the unexpected. And we saw that with the Auckland outbreak, where one day, literally everything was ticking along, and then all of a sudden, 9 o'clock at night, there's an announcement, there's an outbreak of COVID in Auckland, and all of a sudden everything's turned on its head. And we saw a lot of businesses struggle to respond to that. So even though they'd been through that earlier in the year, they definitely saw that as a struggle. We've seen across all our clients some real shifts in the way they interact with their customers. And a good example of that was we work with a large New Zealand bank, and they actually saw the patterns of contact that obviously changed during lockdown. So people weren't calling in the evenings; they were now calling during the day because everybody's at home, got nothing to do. But that's actually how, even out of lockdown, so as everything returned to normal, people have actually gone, you know what, I really enjoyed that evening walk with the kids or whatever it was, so I'm not going to do my jobs and deal with the bank at night. I'm calling them during the day. And they've seen a drastic shift in customer behaviour, even as we move out of a COVID environment, back into what's normal. And I guess the other thing that we've seen is you need to move your business where the revenue is. And I think we're all cognizant of that, particularly, myself as a business owner. It's all about cash flow and where's the next dollar coming from. And I think we all need to just bear that in mind, because what we know and how we're operating today may change quite dramatically tomorrow, as situations unfold. So COVID caused us a huge amount of disruption. So pretty much on day one of our level 4 lockdown, we saw about 60% of our revenue just disappear. And that wasn't clients leaving us, that was clients going, there's so much uncertainty, we're not going to spend that money we were going to spend, doing outbound, or we just don't believe people are going to answer their phones, or we don't know what's happening, so we're just going to put it on hold because it's a safer bet. And we, we're a reasonably large organisation now, but we're still a small business by any stretch of the imagination, and that definitely caused me a few sleepless nights. I think for us, we thought we could either run and hide and cry victim, or we could actually just get stuck in and do what we can and continue to fight and work through it day by day and just roll with the punches. And that's what we did. And so we actually really utilised that time as best we could, locked down at home with 2 kids, unable to go anywhere, to look at how we could seize the opportunity that was there, and how we could help other businesses who are impacted by COVID. And so actually identified some different areas that we'd never really done before, and things we'd never considered doing. And anybody who's been in an outsourced environment or ever looked at commercials for an outsourcer would know that pay per minute or pay per call is one of those things that you just avoid at all costs, because it's fraught with so much risk and danger. But we actually chose to embrace it, and it really opened up our services to businesses that wouldn't traditionally outsource. So normally you'll pay for a resource, and that's a monthly fee or an hourly fee, and that can be quite cost prohibitive for businesses that maybe need someone to answer their phones because they're really busy, or they're in lockdown, or they run off their feet, or they're doing all sorts of other things. they can't really afford a full-time person, but they definitely need some help. And so it really unlocked a lot of new opportunities for us and new customers and people that we'd never spoken to before. And then the other thing with all of our lead generation and our outbound sales campaigns was we made it completely flexible. So we knew that COVID was going to continue to cause a huge amount of disruption, and we didn't really know what the future held. And so we literally removed every kind of, almost all notice periods from our clients and said, we're here as and when you need us on demand. And while that was an incredibly challenging and risky decision as a business to go, we're not too concerned about locking our clients in for the long term, it actually was really refreshing to most of our clients, and they found that to be really, really helpful. And it actually allowed them to then flex based on whatever their cash flow was. We also took the opportunity to see how we could automate things. So we didn't know, what the impact on staff would be if staff were going to start getting COVID. Were we going to have the critical people we needed to actually be able to work during this period? Were there going to be technology challenges? We didn't know, so we looked at, particularly in those first couple of weeks, of what can we automate, and we actually started to automate things and things that we now look back and go, well, I can't believe we ever did that manually, like sending out an Excel report or something like that, that are now automated, and it's actually improved our business overall because we were forced to pivot. We took to, as everybody else does and has, having daily stand-up meetings on Teams and doing Zoom calls and utilising all the technology we had at our disposal to really make things easier and faster. And then we overhauled our setup process. And so normally it would take 1 to 2 weeks to onboard a new client. We actually stripped it right back and went, let's just go back to the actual bare bones. And so now we can pretty much onboard a new client overnight. And then during lockdown, we even did a couple on the same day because they had calls queuing up and they needed somewhere to send them. And so that is no mean feat to be able to train the staff to what they need to be doing for a particular campaign, get all the technology set up, make sure it's all tested and working. If there's email accounts that need to be in place for handling inquiries, all those sorts of things. There's a lot of complexity involved in setting up for a new client. And so, we stripped back a lot of that process, and we streamlined it down to 1 to 2 days. The flow-on effect, I guess, has been that we've now, that's business as usual for us now. So we're actually in a much more competitive position against our competitors. We are much more responsive, and our clients, have found it better, obviously. But that's flowed through to making changes for clients. And so whereas we may have been a bit clunky and taken a bit long to get things changed, sometimes we're now, onto it straight away. Changes are happening in real time, and we've really become a lot more streamlined and faster. And largely because of that, we've been able to double the size of our business this year, even through all of this COVID madness. And that's, a credit to everyone on our team, really, because they've all put in the hard yards to make that possible. And that's why I think it's a real success story when you look at New Zealand as a whole. And we're not the only business that's in this category, but certainly for us, it will end up being a pretty good year overall. But it's definitely been a roller coaster, and we've definitely had to make about 4,000 changes along the way. So pivoting, I think, is here to stay, and we all need to be prepared for that for the next few years. But I think it can make our businesses better overall. It shouldn't just be a COVID response. It can be a good business practice thing as well. Offshoring left with the last cruise ship. This was another trend that we saw really, really early on. And when I'm talking about offshoring, I'm talking about offshoring to the likes of India and Philippines, those lower cost destinations. And they were the ones that weren't ready to handle this type of event. Work from home in those environments is just not something that's even on the radar. So we saw a massive spike of inquiry, and there was a lot of panicked phone calls from people we've never spoken to, as well as existing clients, along the lines of, we've got X number of thousand calls coming in a day, or we've got a team making X number of sales every day. and we haven't heard from them in 2 days, and nobody can get hold of them, or we're expecting, that they're going to go offline tomorrow, or we've seen a massive spike in inquiry. And so again, we saw a massive spike in inquiry of customers coming to us saying, hey, we need some help. What are the options? A classic example, and we can all, we've all probably got our own examples, or we've spoken to people who have been impacted. But a classic example was one of the New Zealand government departments contacted me, and they said, we've got this really, really cool IVR, and we've got agents that can work from home. They've got laptops and mobile phones, but we can't get the calls connected from the IVR to the agent mobile phones. And this is, 700 agents, massive organisations. They're like, could you take a message for all those 30,000 people that call us every day and email that through to the relevant agent? And that was their workaround for COVID. If they had to shut down their contact centre, which is staggering to me in this day and age, that's where a lot of organisations are. But I think a lot of people found their plans were really, really wandering, and what looked okay on paper as a business continuity plan simply just didn't work. So we were sorry, hopefully everybody's got me back now. So we were definitely seeing that come through really, really early. And then as people started to adapt to that, we started to see a lot more focus on automating a lot of those activities, particularly with the lower cost work that's being traditionally pushed offshore. And I think what we've seen in recent months is a lot of organisations bringing that work back onshore, be that to Australia or New Zealand. And I know we may fight it out on the rugby field or the cricket field or whatever your sport of choice is, but we are kind of one market, and we always have been for the last 30 or 40 years. And so we've seen this resurgence of inquiry, people looking to either go to regional Australia, which a lot of organisations are doing, to try and keep a lid on their costs, or come to New Zealand and get a cost reduction that way. We don't have, if you're not aware, we don't have anywhere near the kind of labour restrictions that there are in Australia. Our wage rates are generally lower and stuff like that. So we've seen a real shift and a real anti-offshore sentiment in terms of moving stuff across the other side of the world, where there's no control. You don't really know what's going on. And in a world where you could jump on a plane and just fly there, and you're there the next day and you can check in and see what's going on, it's a different story to now, where there's no travel, and you've got to take the people you're speaking to's word for it that that's what's going on. It definitely looks like a different kind of environment and a different landscape moving forward. I'm sure many of us would never have even imagined having our entire workforce work remotely. We'd planned for it. We knew it was a possibility, but I never actually thought we'd have to put it into practice. Certainly not for an extended period of time, which we had, which was 6 or 7 weeks. And I think that probably caught a lot of people off guard. And as I said before, left a lot of business continuity plans left wanting. Our experience post the lockdown is that staff actually prefer to be in the office, and they really do want to have that contact with people. And we're still seeing that even, 6 months on. I kind of expected there was going to be this massive influx of people going, actually I really enjoyed being at home, having the dog run around or whatever it is, being able to see the kids when they come home from school. But we haven't really seen that. We've seen that a lot of people they're craving that human contact, and they love coming into the office. I actually think COVID made them appreciate it a lot more, just that casual interaction that they have with their team members on a day-to-day basis. And you can't replicate that on a virtual environment at all. Not to the same extent. So when we moved to Christchurch, back to Christchurch a couple of years ago, and I'm Christchurch born and bred, so it always made sense for us to come back here, particularly with a young family. But everybody was like, well, what about all those earthquakes that you guys have? And for the first year or so, I got sick of people asking about earthquakes. The reality is that the earthquakes were now 10 years ago. And I think what we've seen is that Christchurch is a really resilient population. We've dealt with a lot. We've also had, terrorist attacks and all sorts of other things going on, which is, stuff that people wouldn't expect to see in their lifetime, and certainly not in this part of the world. But what it's actually done is it actually put us, I guess, 10 years ahead in terms of our preparation for a pandemic or for the next natural disaster. We, of course, always thought it was going to be an earthquake that was going to strike, and that was what was going to cause our business continuity plan to come into place, and the need to work from home and not be able to access the office and all that sort of thing. Pandemic is very, very similar in that regard, and we'd never even really planned for a pandemic because it was something that's just, I don't think we'd ever have an issue in New Zealand. I mean, we're little old New Zealand at the end of the world. Nobody's going to come. Nothing's going to come and get us here. But as it turned out, we were actually really, really well prepared for the pandemic, and we were able to respond really, really well to that because of all that prep work we did for the earthquake. So when we were setting up the business, first and foremost, front of mind was all about the disaster planning, and technology is so critical in that. As we all know, like technology in contact centers, it's the backbone. We don't notice it when it's there, but when it's not, we're all left scrambling. And I think that planning that we did right from day one was critical in being able to successfully respond to the pandemic. So we always had the ability to operate remotely. We'd never tested it with all of our staff all at once. We do weekly, testing of our business continuity plans because we're so mindful of the fact that the next big one could strike any time, even 10 years later. So we were able to do that pretty seamlessly. Within about 30 minutes, we had everything up and running, from staff running remotely. There was zero disruption to our client services, which was a phenomenal result. And everything actually worked as expected. But it was because we put in all that effort, a couple of years ago, and continue to put in that effort every month when we're checking the plan and making sure it's still relevant and everything's still critical. It really set us up for success when it came to moving all our staff from home. We're deliberately cloud-based. We've been cloud-based since day one. I'm a big fan of cloud-based contact center technology, as everybody is now. But at the time, I guess we were reasonably early adopters in terms of having cloud-based technology be the fundamental building block of your business. And those decisions we made in the early days really set us up for success now. Even though we've all seen all this disruption, there are still businesses that we see that are unable or just unwilling to adapt and be ready for the next disruption. They've got to work around, they transfer all their calls to a mobile, or it all goes to voicemail and they check it every hour or whatever it is, and they'll all go back to the office and things will go back to normal. We've seen that here in New Zealand, and more, as I said earlier, the number of businesses that got called out when Auckland went back into lockdown was quite surprising. I expected businesses to be a lot more prepared, and they just weren't. So, most of the big businesses were, but a lot of the smaller ones weren't. And so I think that's something you can keep in mind when you're looking at, how to seize the opportunity and pivot in a post-COVID world, is the fact that you may be prepared, but a lot of other businesses won't, and that may create opportunities for you. So as I mentioned before, our businesses really took off, and in post-lockdown we doubled in size, which was a massive effort in terms of recruitment and all those sorts of things. But it was really nice to be able to recruit and employ staff when most other businesses were making people redundant, cutting hours, cutting pay, laying people off. So our ability to scale up and work remotely was critical, though, in decisions for clients. So they would only go with us if we could demonstrate that we've been able to work successfully through the lockdown, and that we could do that again should another lockdown strike or another outbreak happen. So that was, again, technology was the critical part of that, and being able to keep in touch with our staff. through the use of technology. We're a contact centre. We're used to talking to people, but I think we so often rely on the fact that you can get the team together in a huddle, or you can go over and speak to your agents or whatever it is. But the ability to actually communicate with them remotely is definitely challenging, but something that it's worth putting the time and effort into. Last point is really that our staff get the same experience, whether they're in the office or whether they're at home. They may be on a different computer, but the experience they get is exactly the same. And I know a lot of businesses struggle with that, and then struggle with trying to educate those staff remotely. So I think that was a big win for us, was being able to just have exactly the same agent experience at home as what they had in the office, and a big factor in the success of the business post lockdown. And should we have to go back into another lockdown, I feel totally comfortable and at ease that our plans are in place and that we will be able to seamlessly make that transition happen again. So we all know that Kiwis are great people, and we're a happy-go-lucky kind of bunch. We're rated number 8 on the UN World Happiness Index, and we've definitely got a laid-back mentality about us. But we're generally a pretty friendly and pretty positive type of people, and we're not just that dissimilar to Australia. So I'm sure Australia is up there as well on the UN Happiness Index. But New Zealand actually in a couple of surveys has been rated number 1 globally for customer service. And I think it's one of those sort of things that you don't really, you wouldn't even be aware of it. But there's a large number of contact centres in New Zealand, and a large number of service businesses. Tourism is one of those things that drives our economy, or it certainly did prior to this year. The skills that we have and the ability to talk to people from all different walks of life and different cultures and different languages and things really oozes right throughout the population. And so I think New Zealand really does have a service mentality, and the fact that New Zealand was rated number 1 for customer service globally is critically important. And my point here is about the people, and they need to be number 1. And I think it's very easy to get away from the fact that we're a people business. Contact centres are people talking to people, and fundamentally that's core business for us. So it is critically important. We've made a significant investment in our staff, and some of this was planned prior to COVID, but it's definitely set us up really, really well for the post-COVID kind of environment. So we've got 1/3 of our office staff is solely dedicated to staff amenities. That's breakout rooms, there's games rooms, pool table, all the usual things. We've got an on-site gym for our staff that's free for them to use. It's not your full Jets kind of experience, but it's enough that staff can do something there. We've got outdoor areas. We've made a huge investment in staff amenities, chill out zones, all that kind of thing. And what we've seen is that, combined with our investment in wellbeing and training and development, has actually led to a 28% reduction in sick leave this year. We expected sick leave to go through the roof with COVID and everybody staying away from work with even the slightest sniffle and all of that. And that's definitely happened. But that investment that we've made in our staff and our training development, all the programs that my wife Gemma has put into place, have really, really served us well. And I can't even measure the ROI that we've had off the back of that, other than the fact that obviously we've had a massive reduction in sick leave, which helps, and a massive reduction in staff attrition. We've also started to move more into a holistic sort of wellbeing program for our staff. We're spending a lot of money in that area, and we've tripled our spend for this year to really help make our staff balanced and make them enjoy work, make it a great place to come, and just to be another reason why we should be an employer of choice and why people should be working here rather than somewhere else. The other thing I just quickly touch on people is post-COVID. I've certainly, I've dealt with my fair share of HR situations and people having difficulties over the years, but the amount of serious mental health issues that we've come across from people being isolated and all of those things is actually even surprised me. And people that you'd think are normally, great every other day of the week and they're happy and smiling at work are actually having a terrible time at home. So one of the things that, and I didn't put this in the slides, but one of the things that we found worked really, really well was during the lockdown was actually just calling people and asking them not how's work going, but how are you coping? And, do you need anything? How's the supermarket shopping going? All of those kind of things, and just sharing those stories that we're all going through together. I don't think you can underestimate the power of that with your staff in terms of engaging them, making them better engaged, and keeping them with you for the long haul, which is so important, as well as it's generally just a nice thing to do. But I think so often we get focused on those work conversations, we actually forget about people's personal lives. Obviously, we've had to adapt with COVID, and a big change has been those turnaround times, and I touched on a lot of that earlier. Clients are expecting things to be up and running much quicker, things to happen, really, really quickly. And a lot of other business owners I've spoken to have said the same thing, but their clients are definitely more savvy, and you need to be responding really, really quickly to those things. We're always talking about momentum and moving at speed, and that's been a critical success thing for us, is being able to just get on and get it done. Our team are kind of lucky that they only have to get mine and Gemma's approval to get something happening or done, so we can actually move really, really quickly. But there's also times where people have done things and not had to run them past us. And there are things you can do, even at an individual level, even if you're a team leader or managing a small group of people without, getting approval or budget. There's lots of things you can do to speed up making those changes, and whether it's coaching sessions and all those things to really drive home results. As I mentioned, we've reduced our setup time, and we're continuously looking to improve that. We're lucky that we're 24/7, so we've got a team that's on at night who are nowhere near occupancy, in terms of being fully loaded with work. So we've been able to make changes overnight, and that's really, really helped the business and been a key advantage for us. So business in New Zealand's always been, we've always been more on the casual side, hence the polo shirt, even though we're back in the office. I think the suit may be dead. But even with everyone back at work, it's still normal to speak to people every day who are working from home or have decided to work remotely every couple of days, and to see them, holding kids or having the dog run around. I know myself, I've worked from home, try and do it at least once or twice a week. And we've got a little 10-month-old who is, a guest star on a number of Zoom meetings. So I think the corporate world is changing in that regard, and I think we can all appreciate that. But we're definitely seeing it that even post-COVID, that's still happening day in, day out. And people are actually embracing that and enjoying it. And it actually makes people more human. So I think, you can actually, you're not just talking to somebody, in a meeting. All of a sudden you're getting a glimpse into their personal life. And so I think that's been a really, really positive thing, but I think it's here to stay. For us, in terms of staff, prospective staff are not just asking about work from home because they'd like that as a perk. It's now part of the job security equation, because if your business can't operate remotely and you have to go into a lockdown or there's some sort of restriction on coming into the office, am I going to have a job tomorrow? We've seen a lot of businesses, and we're obviously on the front lines in terms of outsourcing, but people looking at how do I make my workforce more flexible? How do I scale up and down as we respond to these changing conditions? Do I use contractors? Can I be more flexible with my current staff? Should I be looking at outsourcing? All those kind of things. and again, and I touched on this earlier, with our current clients, we've seen a big push for flexibility, and we've certainly been embracing that, and changing commercial models to allow, things to change rapidly, for whatever comes next with the post-COVID world. And so I think we've got a poll, a question to ask everybody about how they may have changed.
We do indeed, Grant, and we'll get Jess to launch the poll. And the question is, have you changed your contact centre outsourcing arrangements because of COVID-19? Have you, or are you bringing the work back in-house, moving work from offshore to onshore? Now outsourcing when you didn't previously, still outsourcing, nothing's changed, still all in-house, nothing has changed, or don't outsource. Quite a variety of responses there. Grant, what are you seeing happening in New Zealand? And we'll be able to compare the landscape there with Australia, perhaps.
Yeah, look, I think you can. There's definitely a lot of similarities, and we see it between Australia and New Zealand all the time because we operate in both markets. But in New Zealand, the move from offshore back up to onshore is massive. There was this huge support for local businesses post-COVID. And support local is one of those big things. So I think that's what we've been seeing. But also people contacting us who've never outsourced before and are kind of like, well, I've heard about it, or I didn't even know this existed. So how can that help our business be more responsive? Those are the trends that we've been really seeing come through really, really strongly.
Excellent. Well, let's compare. Jess, if you could close the poll and see what our audience has said today. Okay, so the vast majority don't outsource at 41%. Still outsourcing, nothing has changed, and still all in-house, nothing has changed. So neck and neck at 24% each, and 12% bringing the work back in-house. Interesting.
Yeah, not the result I would have expected, but yeah, yeah, it is interesting. Very interesting. That's the reason we do these polls, because they are interesting.
Yep. It sounds like people are on to hear a little bit more about outsourcing and some of the benefits thereof. Grant, I would imagine.
Obviously, I've still got a lot of work to do to convince people.
To nearshore, over to Christchurch. Absolutely. All right. So let's keep moving along so we can ask some questions.
Yeah, sounds good. And we're nearly there too, so thank you for listening to me, hopefully not bore you to death. Staying on course is critical, and with the businesses that we do outbound work for, or lead generation work for, the ones that stayed the course and had the guts to see it through and continue to do activity right through, regardless of what the restrictions were, and now seeing the benefit of that. And those that sort of put things on pause, which is that 60% I talked about before, a lot of those were outbound clients, are now struggling to get traction again. Yes, they might be generating leads, they might be getting, making some sales, but it's definitely a long comeback for them. And so staying on course is so critical. You can't just stop marketing your business because of COVID, because you'll just get left behind. A couple of analysts in New Zealand are predicting that a 30% reduction in media spend means a 3 times longer recovery time. And I actually think it's probably worse than that, in that if you're going to reduce your media or marketing spend by that sort of number, you may not even recover from it, because while you're doing that, you can guarantee most of your competitors are still spending and still pushing ahead harder than ever to make sure that they're taking advantage of the opportunities that are out there. And while things may seem dim and gloom, I think we all need to remember that whatever market we're in, there's always going to be opportunities out there. There's always going to be people needing services and products, and that's not going to change. It's just that the mix of those is going to change. So staying on course is critical. Last point I want to make is just about people again. And our people have obviously been key to the success of our business. whether it's your own people or your customers. You need to remember that we're talking to people every single day, and whether that's talking on the phone or live chat or whatever medium you're communicating with people, they are people, and they're going through all sorts of different, their own situations. And we've all seen them lash out at contact center staff before. It happens. People have always got a gripe or the grumpy customer, and we've all got plenty of war stories about that. But I think we need to just remember that everybody's under a really, really stressful, in a stressful situation. People are losing their jobs, all those sorts of things, which may not impact us, but it may impact them. And it's really important that we don't let those standards slip, and we're mindful of that with the people that we're managing and that we have within our businesses. So I'm sure we've all seen similar stats, but 50% of people would change brands after a bad customer experience. So you can't afford to do that, and that's where investing in your people is critical, and that's why we've continued to do that, and we continue to check in, as often as we can with people just on what's going on in their lives, because if they are happier and our agents are happier, they will give a much better experience. And 1 in 10 customers would not use a business just from a single bad Google review. So, a 10% reduction in your market or increase, if you look at it the other way, in your market share because you've got some good reviews on Google, I think it's well worth remembering that, people are the forefront of whatever contact center we're in. So keep that front of mind. We're a people business. Be kind to your customers. One of the things we did during lockdown was we actually removed all of the KPIs. We were still monitoring them and still looking at them every day, probably more closely than ever before. But we said to the team, we're not going to pull you up on it. We're not going to, there's going to be no hard conversations about, your AHT wasn't low enough, or you didn't hit your sales target for the week, or whatever it is. We just said, just focus on looking after the people you're speaking to every day. And we actually saw what was surprising to me, but an actual reduction in handling time, certainly in terms of the inbound. And our outbound sales actually saw not quite a 15% increase, but we did see an increase, simply because people were able to just be people and talk to their customers like humans. And that was, I was quite surprised to see that, but maybe there's some learnings for the future in terms of, removing KPIs and the way we manage people. Probably some more work to be done there. And we're definitely looking at how we can incorporate that. But if you invest in your people, they'll look after your customers. And that's what you need to just continue to remember, that there are people involved in all the businesses and all the contact centers that we're all involved in. And if we look after them and they're happy, we'll have happy customers. And that's what most of us are trying to achieve for all the different stakeholders we report to or look after. So that's been my big takeaway from this year, is happy agents really does equal happy customers. I won't go and recap all the insights, but we'll share the copy of this with everybody afterwards. But happy to, hopefully we've got some questions that I can do my best to answer in the time we've got left.
We certainly do, Grant. So there are some cheeky questions, but I won't ask the cheeky questions first. I'll ask the easy ones. So an anonymous attendee would like to know, what proportion of lead generation campaigns do you do versus customer service?
So the mix changes throughout the year. We're probably about 50-50 most of the year. Coming up towards Christmas, we tend to have a lot more lead generation outbound activity. But over the course of a year, it probably averages out to be about 50-50.
You talked about 8 insights. You were pivoting, you were technology, there was a whole, office is casual, etc. If you are only allowed to have one insight, what should the audience focus on? What would be the one thing they should focus on?
That's actually a pretty easy question to ask. It's people. And I think 2 of my insights were people, so I guess I'm cheating and picking 2. It really is critical, and I think you can't underestimate investing in people. And it doesn't have to be investment in terms of dollars. Like, budgets are always going to keep getting squeezed in contact centres, and there's always a push to reduce costs and make things more efficient. But it can be an investment in terms of time. So one of the most powerful things that I think from our experience with people was actually just picking up the phone and talking to our agents when they're at home. And again, when we've been back in the office, I try and have conversations with people, not so much about their performance or what's going on or how that campaign's going, but actually just asking them how they are and how they're coping and what's going on outside of work for them. And I think if you're going to take away anything, that would be my biggest piece of advice for any person, any people you're managing, or anybody you interact with, is actually just talking to them about what's going on outside of work, and that's critical. Okay,
so I'm going to ask the cheeky question.
Sure.
So the cheeky question is, and there's a little bit of preamble. COVID-19 has seen a lot of our customers bring work back into the business. Key reasons being cost and spread of work amongst the team. Given this can be outsourcing to New Zealand, is it cheaper? And if so, and this is the cheeky bit, by how much?
Not as cheeky as I thought it was going to be.
I watered it down a little bit.
Look, there's plenty of different comparisons out there, not just ones that I make. On average, we see probably a 20 to 30% reduction in cost compared to doing it in-house in Australia. And I'm not talking about straight wage costs, because whenever you do that comparison versus an outsourcer, often you go, well, why am I I'm paying more to you? But when you look at the total cost of managing an agent, the quality assurance aspect, systems, technology, changing, staff attrition, all those kind of things, it works out to be between 20 and 30% on the cost equation side of things. So it's a relatively significant saving. The thing that I'll add to that, and another point that I often use with people, is that when I was actually working in Melbourne, and I'm sure that many people in Australian contact centres can relate, there's actually a lot of New Zealanders working in those contact centres. So it's actually, it's not that different, I guess, the experience you get here in New Zealand to what you get in Australia, because it's just that the people are in a different location. But it's about 20 to 30%.
Yeah, I think that's pretty consistent. I think when I was managing a team that were located in Christchurch, the cost to deliver through them was 28% less than managing the same business out of Melbourne, interestingly enough. So there you go. There's a direct comparison. Crystal ball time, Grant. How do you see the future of the call centre industry over the next couple of years?
Look, I think there's going to be a huge amount of disruption. I think everybody can see that. I think what we will see is that this trend of moving things away from Philippines, India, and South Africa and Fiji and all those other low-cost destinations is going to continue. And that's not necessarily by people bringing work back in-house or just strictly going, well, we had 1,000 people there, so we'll have 1,000 people here, which we've seen some of. I think a lot of that will come about through, well, actually, now's the time to invest in automating a lot of that. How do we make that more self-service? How do we continue to streamline processes and things so that people don't actually have to contact us and actually fundamentally fix the issue rather than put the Band-Aid on it by having the people answering those questions? So I think that'll be a big trend. I think the other trend will be, obviously, cloud-based technologies are going to be coming, more and more heavily integrated within contact centres. I know at the moment a lot of businesses have got, what I'd call a workaround, albeit potentially a very expensive workaround, but I think we'll see that more and more become critical. And also the push to actually interact with people, not just by voice, but across a range of channels. And I dealt with our insurance company the other day on Facebook Messenger, and it was actually a really pleasant experience because I could just message back and forth with the person over a day or two. And that's, to be in the customer's shoes and actually see the power of it was really quite powerful, because when we do that sort of stuff for a lot of clients, we'll do live chat or, manage their social media or whatever, but to actually see it in action and experience, it was really powerful. So I think that will continue because brands more and more need to differentiate themselves from their competitors. And I think customer service is going to be one of the ways that they differentiate themselves.
Okay, contact centres. Many people see them as money pits, shall we say? And you talked today about a number of areas to save money, but also areas to invest money. Can you summarise the top places to both save and to spend money, and outline, this is the tricky bit, which is more important?
Yeah, look, I think you can save money by spending money a lot. So investing in technology, I think, is a no-brainer. And I know it's hard to get budget for that sometimes, and I know it's really, really challenging to do some of those projects. They're incredibly complex. They take twice as long, cost twice as much usually, and all those sorts of things. But by doing that, you potentially save a lot of labour cost, and that's definitely something we've seen. And so we'll continue to push to utilise that technology better and more tightly integrate it to allow us to free up our agents to do higher value things. So I think that's one area where it's really, really important. And then the people that you've got, I don't think spending money on them is you can't really waste that money, because you get it back in terms of reduced sick leave, reduced attrition, and all those kind of things. And it's not necessarily just about paying your staff more, because they're always going to want more. It doesn't matter what you pay them, they'll always want more. But you can give them a lot of benefits outside of that. And I think we've seen a lot of that in the corporate world over the last 5 years, and in a lot of contact centres. But I think it's really, really critical. And more we need to be valuing the people that we've got, and not just a robot on the end of the phone. And so that's another area where I think spending money on people is a no-brainer.
Cool. So we're almost at time, but we've been talking a lot about people. So the last question I'm going to share with you, or ask of you, is a people question.
Mm-hmm.
So Grant, you mentioned that staff working remotely and staff in the office were treated the same. And this person would like to know, how is that possible?
So it's not easy. And I definitely preface it with that. We've it's not without its challenges. We've had struggles with people working from home, and it doesn't work for everybody. I think the way that we've made it work is that it's a mixture of. It's not a either. It's not, oh, you just work from home or you just work from the office. It's a mixture of both, and I think that is the key to it, is having that balance. Now, for some staff members, that might be 1 day a week is more than enough for them working from home, but others it might be 3 days is okay. And I think getting that balance right is important. Technology is obviously plays a key part in that. It only works as long as you can keep in touch with the people, invite them along to team meetings and huddles and all those sorts of things. And if you can obviously keep an eye on their performance, and that's how we make it work. And it's not perfect all the time. We just like any other business, we see agents slack off at home, or they're supposed to be logged in and they're not, and all those kind of things. But striking a balance, not making an either equation, is definitely the key to making it work.
Well, with that, Grant, we're actually at the hour, and I want to say a huge thank you to you for your generosity, sharing the story, warts and all, but lots of shining stars all over the place, and your insights. To anyone that hasn't had their questions answered, and there are still a couple outstanding, they will be responded to post the webinar, so you will not be forgotten. Grant, any closing remarks?
No, I'd just say that, and to follow on from your point, that if anybody does want to share war stories at any time, I'd love to hear from people. I love talking to, hearing about all sorts of different contact centres and things. So my details are on the slide there, and we'll be sharing that. But we're an open book when it comes to what we're doing. So if you want to hear more or want to ask more questions, I'm totally open to that, and happy to help. But I'd also love to hear from anybody who just wants to shoot the breeze and share some contact centre war stories as well. So feel free to reach out anytime. And obviously, if anybody needs outsourcing, then they should definitely pick up the phone and call. But more just a friendly chat. That's
Well, thanks once again, Grant, and thanks again to RingCentral, our national silver sponsor, and thank you to everybody that joined us today. May you have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you happen to be. See you next time.